Hello, today I have come to the beautiful churchyard at Libberton on the south side of Edinburgh. This cemetery boasts some lovely grave art from the mid-18th to early 19th centuries. I do love grave or death art, and here at Libberton Church you can see some stunning examples. Everywhere, reminders of death and that you yourself are mortal and will one day have to take the eternal sleep can be seen, with the legend Memori Morti, Latin for remember you must die, seen everywhere in this graveyard. Also, interestingly, is the first example of a memorial to the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic I have seen in a graveyard. Now, I'm going to take you back to a time when Scotland had some of the best medical schools in the world. To get your degree in medicine in the great schools of Edinburgh, Glasgow and Aberdeen was worth its weight in gold. But before X-ray machines, the only way to see how a body worked was to get one, cut it open and have a look inside. And by law, the doctors and surgeons who taught at these schools could receive the bodies of hanged murderers. But there was never enough to go around. So these doctors and surgeons, these eminent members of society, sought the help of a group of men who became known as the Resurrection Men, the Sack-em-up Men, or the Body Snatchers.
Explore Castle Menzies after dark.
Is it really haunted?
Is it really haunted?
Book now to find out.
If you dare.
And they would perhaps pay the local gravedigger a couple of shillings to tell them when a body had been buried. They'd wait until it was a nice dark night, preferably with no moon shining, and they'd break into the cemetery and lift the body and take it in to the city of Edinburgh, if they were working in the capital, and sell it to the surgeons at Surgeon Hall. Now, if somebody had died in your family, you may work within the family group or pay people called watchers to protect your deceased family member in the cemetery. They'd watch the graveyard long enough that the corpse had deteriorated too badly and it was of no use to the body snatchers. And this is a story about a tragedy that took place in Libberton Graveyard in December 1827. Watching over graveyards to try and protect the dead from the Resurrection Men must have been a lonely and frightening job, especially at a time when belief in ghosts was almost universal, with almost everyone fearing spooks and restless spirits. A man writing in the Kinrossshire Advertiser on the 30th of November 1850 actually took part in watching over the dead in a local graveyard. He writes, "Many a weary hour I have travelled the walks of a rural churchyard, with gun on shoulder during the pitchy darkness of midnight, listening with my fellow watcher for the approach of the detested plunderers. Every rustle of a branch gave an alarm, while the moaning and groaning of the trees were in no way calculated to steady the nerves." The same man also talked of the danger of being armed whilst patrolling the graveyard, while frightened and jumpy. He states, "The resurrectionists would have been in less danger from our guns than we ourselves would have been from the fire of our neighbours." Tragic accidents were bound to happen. On the night of the 4th of December 1827, 7 men were guarding the graves in Libberton Kirk in Edinburgh. These men were in a high state of alert, as John McQuilkin, a body snatcher, had been apprehended just over a week before, lifting a body from Libberton on the 28th of November. For that he was sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment. On the night of the 4th of December, the 6 men were assisting the regular watchman, a man named MacLeod. They were using the offering house, which can still be seen at the gates of Libberton Churchyard to this day. Some of the men had been drinking but it was stated none of them were drunk. The conversation that night centred on the capture of McQuilkin on the 28th of November, and the feeling that the resurrection men might be seeking revenge. To add to the atmosphere, it was a freezing cold night, with a dusting of snow on the ground. It was also windy, with the occasional flash of lightning. At 7 p.m, the regular watchman, MacLeod, went off to get some refreshment. Another man, Andrew Ewart, took one of the 3 guns the watchers had, and went off to patrol the graveyard. Ewart had been away for longer than was usual, so 2 other men picked up the other 2 guns and went to look for him. The men were John Swan, a carter from Libberton, and Henry Pennycook, a weaver. The path goes around the church, and usually the patrolling watchers would go together round this path, which will bring them back to the starting point. But for some reason that night, Swan went one way and Pennycook the other. A short while later, the silence was broken with a gunshot. At this, John Swan fired his gun into the air to give the alarm. When he ran round the church to the south side of the graveyard, he saw a group of men standing in the corner of the cemetery. It transpired that in the dark, Andrew Ewart had mistaken Pennycook for a grave robber and shot him. He stated to anyone who would listen that it was not his fault, as twice he had called the challenge to the figure, who did not answer. Pennycook stated that he shouted back, "Andrew, you'll no shoot me," but Ewart protested that he had fired before Pennycook responded. Henry Pennycook died from his wounds 4 days later, and Andrew Ewart was charged with murder. At his trial at the High Court in Edinburgh on the 12th of February 1828, it was heard that the 2 men, Ewart and Pennycook, were the best of friends. They had been pals since childhood. Ewart was described as a quiet, inoffensive man who could not be considered quarrelsome. It was also stated that he was greatly distressed by the accident. The prosecution made great play on the fact that the men had firearms that night, stating that even if the figure in the graveyard had been a resurrection man, stealing bodies, although a repugnant crime, was not a capital offence. So even if the dead man was in the graveyard to lift the dead, and he was shot and killed by a watcher, this watcher would be guilty of murder. It was also stated that Ewart was not in personal danger when he fired the fatal shot. The defence answered that armed watchers protect most graveyards, and posters were put in place around the churchyards, warning that armed men protected the graves. The jury returned after an hour and found Andrew Ewart guilty of murder, but recommended strongly that mercy should be shown. The judge, Lord Mackenzie, ignored this and sentenced Andrew Ewart to death. In a cruel irony, the judge stated that after Ewart was hanged, his body was to be handed over to the surgeons to be dissected. But I am glad to say that Andrew Ewart's death sentence was changed, and the Globe newspaper reported Ewart was being held at His Majesty's pleasure. I have not been able to find out exactly what happened to Ewart, although we do know he was not executed. For one, his name does not appear in the excellent book, the Encyclopedia of Scottish Executions. So we don't know exactly what happened to him, but that he didn't pay the ultimate price for what in effect was an accident. I mean, you know, it's dark, he was jumpy, and he shot somebody who was one of his best friends. So it was clearly unintentional, so it's nice to know that, as I said, he was punished but not by being hanged. Before I go, I would thoroughly recommend, if you can, to come out and have a wee look around this fantastic graveyard. It's got some amazing graves, death art, and it's well worth a visit. It's a very peaceful, tranquil place. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe. You might like to take one of our dark history tours, ghost tours, or paranormal investigations that are held in Perthshire, Glasgow and Stirling. If so, please visit our website, which is www.hismajesties.org. historyandhorrortours.com. Thank you.